Welcome to the Daily Dawg Podcast. Today is Saturday, November 15th, and it is game day in Athens, or I guess we should say game night, or it will be game night in Athens. The Georgia-Texas game, Georgia's last SEC game of the year, takes place tonight in Sanford Stadium between the hedges. Official start time is listed as 7:30, or that's the broadcast start time. The actual kickoff time will probably be closer to 7:49-ish or so. So it's going to be a cool evening, a night game in Sanford Stadium. It'll be time for the light show, the new fireworks, and I certainly expect that the crowd and the fans are going to be out in full force. Game Day opted not to come to Athens this week, having just been to Athens just a couple weeks ago for the Ole Miss game. I guess they felt like it was too many trips to Athens in a short time, even though this was the best ranked matchup on paper this week. When you look at all the games that are out there, this is a 5 versus 10 matchup, top 10 matchup, and clearly the best game and one of the most impactful games on the college football season as far as who's going to be in the playoff, what's going to happen. I mean, you look at it, Texas comes in at 7-2, but ranked number 10 in the AP poll and in the playoff poll. Georgia's 5 in both the AP and the playoff poll. Georgia has a better than 80 or 90% chance of advancing to the playoff, according to most of the computer models and metrics that take a look at these things. Texas is in a more precarious position. They could make the field and they could play their way in. They're already, if the playoff started today, they're already in the playoff with a 10th position. So the way it's going to work is, of course, there's 12 teams that make the playoff. Top 12 teams in the playoff poll are not necessarily going to make it, though, because in this particular year, the ACC champion is likely, right now, or the highest ranked ACC team is below the top 12. So you're going to have that ACC team make it in there. So they're going to get elevated, which is going to bump out the either the 11th or 12th place team in the poll. And then also you have to have your group of 5 team, which is also not in your top 12 right now. That stands as USF, which is down at number 25. So if the playoffs started today, you would have Miami jump up into the 11th position, and you'd have USF jump into the 12th position. And so that's going to bump out the teams that are already in those spots, make it a little harder for them to get into that playoff position. So who are those teams again? Let's just take a look. I was trying to make sure I remember. Yeah, Oklahoma and BYU. BYU, after their loss last week, fell to 12th, but 12th would get you bumped out right now. Miami is 15th, so they get bumped up to the number 11 spot. And like I said, South Florida is actually 24th. They're 25th in the AP poll and 24th in the college football playoff poll. So they get bumped up to the 12th spot. And that would be the team that Georgia would play if the playoffs started right now. Georgia's in the 5th position, so we would stay 5th, which means we would be the highest ranked team of the teams not to get a first round bye. So we would get to play at home, and we get to play the lowest ranked team left in the playoff field, or the 12th seed. In this case, it'd be South Florida. So I've heard some experts say that Georgia would probably be anywhere from a 10, 12 to 17-point favorite in that game. So that's what would happen if the playoffs started today. Texas at the 10 spot, they would be in the game, and they would have a game against Ole Miss, who's 7. So they would be on the road at Ole Miss, who would be the 7th seed, and Texas would be the 10th seed. But the playoffs are not starting today, and so we still have 3 games left for most people. Georgia has 3 games left. We have the Texas game tonight. Then we have Charlotte at home for our last home game of the year. So that'll be your senior. That'll be your senior day. That'll be sort of your send off. Although again, Georgia could be in the position where, for the first time ever, they'll be playing a home playoff game in the playoff. That could be something that's coming. So even though we'll have what normally we would think, okay, this is the last game at Sanford Stadium, the Charlotte game, the Georgia Tech game is in Atlanta, not at Bobby Dodd Stadium at Grant Field, but instead at Mercedes-Benz Stadium this year, because Tech has sold the rights to that game so that it can be a higher revenue game. So we're going to have a lot of fun by playing that game in the Dome. A place that, as long as Georgia's not playing Alabama, we like playing in the Dome. So that's going to be a fun, exciting game. But so normally the Charlotte game 2 weeks from now, or a week after, I guess actually a week from today, would be would be our last home game. But it may turn out that we have that home playoff game. However, if Georgia is to make the SEC championship game, then Georgia would get a bye. Well, no, not necessarily get a bye. If Georgia makes and wins the SEC championship game, then they will end up with a bye, one of the 4 byes. So they would go straight to the quarterfinal. They'll be in one of the bowl games. I forget which one it is, or I haven't looked yet, that's designated as those quarterfinal games. So we wouldn't have that home game. And so the Charlotte game will be the last game of the year. Either way, this is our last SEC game. Georgia is wrapping up its SEC schedule. Several other teams have other games to play. In fact, Texas has only played so far 5 of their SEC games coming into today. So they have this game against Georgia, and then they have a game against Arkansas, and then they have their in-state traditional season-ending rival, which is back on the schedule after being off for a few years when Texas A&M left for the SEC. They split up the Texas A&M Texas end of the year clash. They weren't able to work that out, but now that they're back in the conference, that game is back on as an annual rival. And so last year they played at Texas A&M, and this year the game will be in Austin. So Texas still has a lot of work to do, but that's a good position for them because Texas is in the position where they can play their way into the playoffs. Not sure if they can get in if they just win one of these 2 remaining big games, but they do have these 2 big games on the schedule where they're playing a pair of top 5 opponents. They got number 3 Texas A&M, and they got number 5 Georgia today. So you would think if they won 1 out of 2 of those, they'd have a chance. But however, they do already have 2 losses on the season. So if they win one of those and lose one of those, they'll end up at 9-3. And thus far, we have not seen a 9-3 team or a 3-loss team make a playoff, either in the old 4-team playoff field or last year's one and only version of the 12-team playoff. We haven't seen a 12-team playoff team, a 3-loss team as an at-large team make the field. And I say it as an at-large team because I pointed this out recently, but Clemson made the game last year, having won the ACC championship game. So they got elevated into the playoff, bumped Alabama out, as you might remember, and got a chance to play in the playoff series as a 3-loss team. So, in fact, we saw something unusual in that Ohio State was a 2-loss team that marched their way through the playoffs and won the national championship. So we have not seen too many 2-loss champions. But this new playoff era is going to produce some things we haven't seen before, and that could be one of them. So stakes are pretty high for Texas. Again, if they lose this game, they're almost assuredly out of the SEC championship options. Texas A&M and Alabama are both undefeated coming into today's play. Georgia has 1 loss, and Ole Miss has 1 loss. So, Texas already has 2 Texas already has 2 losses on the season, but only 1 in conference. So if they lose this game, they would have 2 conference losses. And chances are, with the way the teams are stacked in front of them, that's not going to work out to end up as a team in the SEC championship. And of course, if they lost today, not only would that put them probably on the outside looking in for the SEC championship, it would also make their playoff hopes precarious. Not getting into the SEC championship means they wouldn't have a chance to redeem themselves. That's what happened to Clemson last year. Clemson lost its regular season final to South Carolina. Clemson sort of backdoored their way into the ACC championship game, and then they got to take on SMU, and they were able to beat SMU, and so all of a sudden they resurrected their playoff hopes by playing their way in. But again, that scenario doesn't look likely for Texas. Texas's best chance to get into the playoff would be to beat Georgia and beat Texas A&M. Georgia probably can absorb this loss as long as they beat Georgia Tech, as long as we beat Georgia Tech, or if we beat Texas here, then we can probably afford to even lose to Georgia Tech and still make the playoff field as a 10-2 team. I don't know that we'd still be the number 5 seed or necessarily be a home seed, one of the 5, 6, 7, or 8 seeds which get the home game, but we certainly hope so. That would be the most exciting. So this is part 2 of what I would call part one and part two of the Breakdown Texas. So we did so we talked history on the last podcast. We talked about the state of Texas. We talked about Sarkisian and who he is and what we can expect, and a little bit about what the trend has been for Texas lately on the field, or at least the last year or two. They have elevated their game. It's been a while, but there's been sort of the constant joke, Texas is back, and then they flounder. But the last couple of years, Texas has been a playoff team, and they're on the cusp of being a playoff team again this year, although they are in a little bit of a step back situation. I mean, they came into this season much hyped as the number one team in the country, Arch Manning hyped as the top Heisman hopeful, and as they sit now with 2 losses in a playoff position, but with a couple tough games to go, games they're not favored in necessarily. They are not favored in the game today against Georgia. They are a 6.5-point underdog, and the ESPN predictive models and other predictive models give them about a 40% chance to win this game. I haven't looked to see what the A&M scenarios will be. They will be taking on A&M at home, but right now I would assume, based on A&M's success on the field, that they would, if the A&M game was tomorrow, they would be an underdog in that game too. So Texas is in a good and bad position. They're in the 10th spot. Like I said, playoffs started today, they'd be in. However, they've got 2 teams against top 5 teams. So it's all in British soccer lingo. If you're a soccer fan, you'll hear the soccer announcers, the British soccer announcers say, well, they have it all to play for. And so it's all to play for on the field today. And that's the case for Texas. It's all on the field to play for. They control their destiny as far as getting into the playoffs. But to take a hold of that destiny and be certain about it, they would have to win against us today, and they would have to win against Texas A&M. So we've talked about, so it does seem like they've taken a step back. And look, no poking holes or fun at them. We've been talking all season about the fact that Georgia has taken a step back, right? This team has not been as powerful. This team has not been as dominant as what we've seen in the past. However, we basically started in the top 5, and here we are after a lot of consternation and hand-wringing and concern about the defense and whether or not we're starting too slow and letting other teams in the game, and certainly the frustration of losing a 9th straight game or 9 out of 10 to Alabama. All of that has come to pass. It wasn't the 9th straight game, but 9 out of 10. And so, all of these things from the early season, as we progress, the team looks like it's rounding into form. It feels like the team is playing better. They seem to play their most complete game last week in the win on the road against Mississippi State. And Mississippi State is an improving team we talked about, but they are 5-5 after the loss. Now, they also have one of the hardest schedules in the country. And so when you look at the teams they played and you look at their model, they actually are a top 25, top 30 talent-based team. Their schedule shows that they've had one of the most difficult schedules on the season. So it's possible that you would look at Mississippi State differently if they had a different schedule. They might be an 8-2 team, or probably not 8-2, but they might be 6-3 at this point, or they might be, let's see, they've already played 10 games, so they certainly could be 6-4. Maybe they would be 7-3 if they had an easier schedule, but it hasn't worked out that way for them. So, again, the idea just being, we talked about after we broke down the Mississippi State game, was that we don't want to get caught looking at fool's gold and think, all right, Georgia's put it all together. They're kicking butt now. They're getting sacks. Defense is playing great. Offense is playing great. They're ready to roll. State is not on Georgia's level, and State is not on the level of the teams that we are looking at in the playoff or the possible SEC championship teams, and saying, okay, this is what we're going to have to do to win a championship. But Georgia does seem to be progressing. They are playing better, and they seem to be stronger. And so, like I said, after all the consternation, all the concern, here we are. We're 3/4 of the way through the season. We have 3 games left, including today, out of the 12-game regular season. And then we'll see where we go with the postseason. We will have a postseason future of some kind, definitely going to a bowl game. Hopefully, most likely, the models suggest right now we're most likely in a playoff scenario. We may yet be in a chance to play for the SEC championship. So Georgia will have some postseason options, but where are we and how do we stack up? That's the conversation we've been having all year. So we're probably not up there. We have not played at the same level of dominance and execution that teams like Ohio State and Indiana and Texas A&M have done so far. Alabama is ahead of us too, although they also have one loss, and that loss is nowhere near the kind of loss we lost to them. Alabama, number 4 team in the country. However, Alabama lost to FSU, who's now got a losing record. So, there's just all these sort of contrasted comparisons. But as I said earlier in the week, talking about our playoff position just before the new playoff rankings came out, and very little changed in the playoff rankings from Georgia's perspective. So we haven't done a deep dive on that, but I do have some information. I'll just tangent for a minute to say, listen, I've heard, especially among some Georgia and SEC aficionados, that there's a lot of concern about the fact that Ole Miss, for instance, got jumped by Texas Tech. And Texas A&M, you might have thought, might have jumped to Indiana, had a close loss against a not very good Penn State team. I mean, not a close loss, a close win. They could have lost. They had to pull it out of the ashes right there at the end. Whereas Texas A&M went on the road against a very good Missouri team and beat them handily. And so you look at the two teams; they're both undefeated, and you say, well, and you can make an argument for Texas A&M for number 1 in the country, even over Ohio State. So those are your 3 undefeated teams: Ohio State, Indiana, and Texas A&M. A&M remained in the rankings, stuck at number 3. And it might have made some sense for them to jump over Indiana this week. So, you saw some things there that say maybe give you a little pause or a little concern to say, is the SEC getting the proper treatment for its record? Even Alabama at number 4. Now, again, it's always hard for these rankings to look past record, right? So the 3 undefeated teams are clumped at the top. Alabama has a loss, and it's a bad loss, like I said. However, nobody has a better resume in total than Alabama, having beaten 3 current top 25 teams and several other teams that are highly ranked teams or well thought of teams. Teams like Missouri. Missouri was in the top 25 last week. They lost to Texas A&M, and they were on their 3rd string quarterback because they've had so many injuries at quarterback. They just weren't overly competitive against A&M, and so now they're out of the rankings, and so that took away one of Alabama's current top 25 teams. Again, you can go back and look at it and say, well, when they played Missouri, they were a top 25 team, and a lot of people do it that way. They say, well, they have top 25 win against whoever. But again, I don't like to look at it that way. I like to look at what's the current ranking, or at least can we project how we think they're going to finish on the season? Because, like I said, at various points in this season, you had Penn State was number 2 and 3 in the country, right? So I don't think it does anybody any good to go around and say, well, like Oregon, unfortunately, Oregon, that's one of the reasons Oregon's ranked down at 8th right now, is because it doesn't really do any good to go around and say, well, Oregon, went on the road and won against the number 2 or 3 team in the country, whatever Penn State was ranked at that time. Because clearly Penn State is not and isn't even going to finish in the top 25. They've lost 6 in a row since that Oregon game was the first of 6 straight losses. They've lost their quarterback. So, they're just they've fired their coach. So clearly they're not the number 2 or 3 team in the country. So you can't give Oregon credit. That's why I just don't think it makes any sense to look at those rankings that way. So you have to readjust each week and say, what about, where are they in the current top 25? Georgia also has as good a resume as anybody in the top 10 with 2 wins against the current top 25. One of those, a top 10 win against number 7 Ole Miss. The other one against number 23 Tennessee. So as a Georgia fan, you want to see Tennessee continue winning its games because they're not going to threaten us for the SEC championship. And at this point, it only strengthens our resume if Tennessee keeps their record up. So we'd like everybody we already played to go out and win their games now, unless they could do us a favor and help us get into the SEC championship game. And like I said, I want to be clear. I brought that up a couple podcasts ago about, would we be better off? Look, I think my position I've settled in on is I'm going to be really comfortable if we can sort of maintain this 5th position and end up, or any of the 5 through 8 seeds, honestly, as long as we get a home playoff game. But there's a big difference between being the 8th seed and the 5th seed. The 8th seed is going to play the 9th seed. So you look at that matchup last year, it worked out okay for Ohio State, but Ohio State had at the time what everybody thought was going to be a really tough game. In fact, a lot of people predicted Tennessee to go on the road and beat Ohio State on the road to start the playoffs last year. Instead, Ohio State thrashed Tennessee, which began their march through the playoffs, where they just looked dominant and they sort of resurrected their season, whereas they had been kind of left for dead with 2 losses outside of the Big Ten championship, and possibly maybe not even, tenuously on the make. I mean, I think everybody thought they would make the playoff, and they did, but it was it didn't look good, and then yet they start off in the playoff. They beat Tennessee soundly. They go on and they march straight through the playoffs and win the national championship. So again, that's why we think that can be a good spot to have that home momentum and start. But that is a tougher, they started with the toughest road. They started with a team like Tennessee coming in to play them, as opposed to, Penn State got to play SMU at home. And that game was not super competitive. It was pretty easy for Penn State to win that game and advance to the next round. So I'll feel good about our position if we're able to maintain one of those top 8 spots, and particularly maybe the 5th or 6th seed, where hopefully we get to play a lesser team. Again, even the 6th seed right now would be taking on. Now that would be, that one's going to be a little more precarious. The 6th seed in today's playoff, if it started today, is going to end up playing Miami. Now Miami's outside of the top 12, so they're kind of getting gifted in there because they would be the ACC front runner. But that's not an easy game. I mean, right away you see that's a much tougher game. I certainly think we would all feel a little more, and of course that'd be the dynamic of Georgia having to play Carson Beck. And look, this may yet happen. Miami may play their way solidly into the playoff, and Georgia may be in a position where that may be a game. I mean, that's something we could look at. We have some fun and interesting scenarios out there in the playoff and SEC championship. If we get to the SEC championship, though I think the rest of the country would think it's really boring, I'd like a second crack at Alabama, so that we can see if we can fix the wrong from earlier this season, get over that hump, get over that 4th down we weren't able to get, those points we weren't able to get, and try to win that game. There's no saying the game would flow the same way. Maybe Alabama beats us soundly. They seem to go on and actually get better as the season's gone on too. So maybe we missed our opportunity to beat Alabama when they were a little weaker. We'll have to see. But, if that didn't work out, if Alabama somehow fell out, and that would be, how would Alabama fall out? Well, Alabama's got a game today against Oklahoma. And so that's an intriguing game. I don't know what to think about it. I think Alabama, they're at home. They lost last year to Oklahoma, so I think they're going to be very focused on Oklahoma. A lot of players on that team are going to remember that they lost their opportunity to make the playoff by going on the road and getting beat by a not very good Oklahoma team. So I imagine they'll be focused. I imagine they'll give it their all. But Oklahoma is probably good enough at their best to beat Alabama, or certainly make it a competitive game. And so that's going to be an intriguing game. But so for Alabama to fall out of the SEC championship position, being undefeated in the conference right now, they have 2 conference games left, Oklahoma today, and then they have a cupcake game in between now and then the Auburn game to close out the season, the traditional Iron Bowl at the end of the season. Auburn does not look, Auburn has played almost everybody tough this season, but has just had a series of terrible close losses, and of course has fired their coach. And then the close losses continue. They went on the road against Vanderbilt, and they went to Vanderbilt, and for the first time all season, they put up a lot of points and yards, but they gave up a lot of points and yards, and Vanderbilt pulled out the game in overtime. So another close loss for Auburn. But they're playing tough, so they could give Alabama a game. But you wouldn't predict. You would expect Alabama to win both the Oklahoma and the Auburn game that they have remaining. So anyway, all I was trying to say is I would find it exciting to get another crack at Alabama this season. And if we don't get it in the SEC championship game, there's a decent chance that we're both in the playoff. If the playoff started today and Georgia had that home game against South Florida, won it, the 4th seed would be Alabama. So the team waiting for us, sitting around with the bye, waiting for us to advance, would be Alabama. So there would be your rematch. So, but Texas A&M, who famously, has been bantied about how all the many years now that Texas A&M has been in the conference and Georgia's only played Texas A&M once. So if Texas A&M and Georgia managed to be an SEC championship game matchup, that would be fun and intriguing as well. Just because of it'd be something exciting, a team we haven't really played. So, okay, there's a lot of setup. So what are we trying to do today? Today is time to wrap up. Because it's game day. Today we have to wrap up our predictions. We have to finalize it. I hinted at some ideas. Again, we talked about who is Texas, where is Texas right now. And so that's what we were just covering again. We're kind of wrapping that up again from yesterday and bringing it into today and saying, who is Texas? Texas is a team that Sarkisian has elevated to be a 12-13 win team the last couple seasons. They've been in the playoffs. They made it to the semifinals. Well, of course, there was only a 4 team, so you started at the semifinal the first year they made the playoff. But they made it to the playoff and lost to Washington, who went on to lose to Michigan in the national championship game, going back 2 seasons. And then last year, Texas got the home game against Clemson. They beat Clemson and then advanced to play one of the top 4 seeds in Arizona State. And they played a tough, close game against Arizona State and pulled that one out by 1 score, and then went on to play Ohio State. And they were close late in the game against Ohio State, but it fell apart for Texas. Ohio State won by 2 scores and then went on to win the national championship. So Texas ended up winning two games in the playoffs, getting 13 wins last season, and coming just short of moving on to the national championship game. So they came back this year as the number 1 team in the country. But like us, they had a lot of attrition. They've had a lot of attrition each of the last 2 years out of 12, 13 win teams. They've seen especially a lot of guys on defense go pro. And this year they turned over the offense to Arch Manning after Quinn Ewers is gone now. And they still had their running backs, but they were resetting with a whole new set of wide receivers. Some guys maybe had been on the team, but not the guys who led them before. So, and they're also rebuilding on their offensive line, and that's been a little bit of a problem. One thing that's certainly hurt Arch Manning and hurt their offense in the same way our offense was stymied early in the year is having to rebuild their offensive line. A lot of guys have gone, several guys went pro. They had to bring in some new guys, get some experience, and experience at offensive line. A lot of college football and pro football experts will tell you experience at offensive line means everything in terms of how well your offense can function, how efficient it can be, and how powerful they can be. So not a great scenario to hand a first-year starting quarterback or a first-time starting quarterback a shaky offensive line to have to play behind. That's going to make them nervous. So I think Arch Manning has been, he was overhyped. For a guy who's never been a starter to be named the Heisman frontrunner is kind of silly, and it was just a ridiculous amount of hype, and it just shows you how you can't get behind everything you hear, even from the experts out there in the college football world and the sports broadcast world. But I think it's also been overhyped how bad he's been. Yes, the Texas offense has sputtered, and it's not been very good, but Arch Manning's numbers are not that bad. I was looking at it, and he's like 70th in the country in completion percentage, whereas Gunnar Stockton, by comparison, is more like 14th. If you look at their quarterback rating, and I've mentioned before, I have no idea how those things are computed. And all I can do is look at it and say, look, it's an index, it's a number. Gunnar Stockton is 154, and Arch Manning is like 152 or something. They're very close, and so they're both in the top 30 or 40 or so in the country in the quarterback rating system. Arch has thrown for a few more yards, a little over 2,200 yards, I think. He's thrown for 8 touchdowns and 16 interceptions. Gunner's thrown 15 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Arch has scored 6 touchdowns with his legs, and so he's got positive run yards, and so does Gunner. So they actually compare pretty favorably, and I think it's a very fascinating comparison, right? Because Texas, the way things seem to come down, it seems like Texas, Alabama, and Georgia were the finalists for the big Arch Manning sweepstakes when his recruiting was going on. And it feels like, honestly, it came down to Georgia or Texas, and it ended up being at Texas. So, we also got Gunner in that same time frame. So it'd be interesting to know what the dynamic would have been if Arch was on the team and competing with Gunner. Would one of them have left, because they, wanted a better opportunity? be a more clear path, because clearly one of them would win that battle, one of them wouldn't, and so they're both too talented and too good quarterbacks probably to just sit around waiting behind a guy who just took over as starter to play. So who knows what the dynamic would have been, but it would have been fascinating, and it's fascinating. And a lot of people have made a big deal about Arch Manning is finally going to play between the hedges after he made 4 or 5 visits recruiting. You might remember famously the paint line guys spelled out "We want Arch" as a part of the recruitment that was going on. Arch was seated in the recruiting section in the end zone closest to the Sanford Drive Bridge, that end of the stadium. And A.D. Mitchell, I think it was, our very excellent wide receiver who helped us win national championship or 2, caught a touchdown pass in a game where Arch was sitting in the low stands and went right towards Arch. And you might remember there was some high-fiving and from the stands to the player on the field when Arch was a recruit. That was also a little ironic because A.D. Mitchell would be on the team with Arch later since he transferred over to Texas. So, there's a lot of connections. And Texas is definitely, while we haven't built a huge rivalry with them, and like I talked about yesterday, this is just the 8th game in the history of the series that started all the way back in the first played game in 1949 Orange Bowl down in Miami. This is just the 8th game in the series. It's our chance to tie up the series and make it 4-4 and help make that history balance a little better in our favor. But but it will be the 3rd game in just a little over a calendar year. So it's, I think Texas, especially if we're able to win this game, is going to feel a little hard done. They've come into the conference and basically they have won all of their conference games except for Georgia and the one game this year against Florida. Otherwise, they've beaten everybody else in the conference. So they're going to feel a little tired of playing Georgia probably if we come out a winner tonight in Sanford Stadium. Or at least they're going to start thinking of it the way we think of the Alabama situation, like, hey, we need a chance to play that team and beat them. This is getting old. So let's hope that that's the scenario. Let's hope that's how they feel by the time this game is over. But so it's a fascinating, there's starting to be, and definitely we're seeing that Georgia is fighting more with Texas for recruits. We used to see Alabama and Florida and Auburn, Tennessee, those be the teams in our region where we're fighting for those recruits, sometimes LSU, but now you see Texas and Georgia going head-to-head for a lot of recruits. And in recent time, Texas has managed to, while Georgia still has either the number 1 or number 2 recruiting class, last I looked, I haven't watched that closely in this upcoming cycle, Texas has pulled some big commitments, and they did last year. They got a couple players that we really wanted and that ended up going to Texas, including Justice Terry was a big defensive line recruit that we were really hoping to have and had been committed to Georgia and then switched to Texas late, and it looks like money was a factor there. And so, this rivalry is growing. It's becoming a thing, and we'll see how it goes after tonight. So also, I'm going to take a little sip. Sorry, I do have to keep my voice going. But I did want to point out, if you're watching on video, I've enjoyed this. I bought this cup right after, as you can see, the first 2021 National Championship. It's got the 2021 National Championship logo. And I have always enjoyed referring to this. When I first got it, I amusingly would tell people that I drink from the chalice of champions. And I've just always enjoyed that. I laugh to myself about that. So I will take a sip from the chalice of champions. So, which seems like a great thing to do in just ahead of a huge game and SEC matchup tonight. So, okay, so what's going to happen? Or so what are we going to do now to break down this game? We've covered who. We've talked about now where Arch is as quarterback. We've talked about who Texas is, what's the state of their program. They're on the cusp of potentially a disappointing year, and certainly if they lose this game tonight, it's going to push this season into a disappointing year. They're going to fall to 3 losses. They're going to be on the outside of the playoff looking in, needing a win to have a shot at getting the playoff, to become the first 3-loss at large team to make the playoff field. And things are going to be a little rough for a team that started out as the preseason number 1. And it's been a wild ride for them too, by the way. Let's just make this point. I have rarely seen a team bounce around as much as they have in the rankings. The fact that this is a top 10 matchup again is actually quite shocking. They started off as number 1, of course, lost on the first day. They spent a couple weeks at number 7, then 8, then 10, then 9. And then they went from 9 to out of the rankings when they suffered that second loss against Florida. And that was just back on October 5th. So when the October 5th rankings were released, they were out of the poll. And they came back into the poll the next week at number 21. They hung around at number 22. So they go, so for the next 3 weeks, they're at 21, then 22, then 20th. And then all of a sudden, week before last, they jumped from number 20 to number 13, which didn't have as much to do with what they did. I mean, there was the Oklahoma win, which looked very impressive. They beat Oklahoma 23-6, and Oklahoma has been a consistent top 15, top 18, top 25 team all season. So they got a lot of credit for that, but also a lot of the attrition around them helped free up some spots where the middle of the poll just had a lot of movement. A lot of people were moving down and they flew up. And then a little more attrition. They didn't play. They've been on the off week getting ready for this game. They didn't play at all. And then they moved up from 13 to 10. And this is your AP poll rankings, by the way. So, that's been quite a jump to go from 20 to 10 in 2 weeks and only having played one game in that time span. So, again, a lot of that has to do less with Texas doing anything impressive, clearly when they weren't even playing a game last week, to what's been happening in the poll as people take losses and whatnot. Somebody has to, as you look down the poll and you start filling these things in, somebody has to be number 10, right? And I kind of made this point the other day. Look, you should always, it's always easy to take the polls when they come out and look at them and say, I don't think so-and-so should be 4, or I don't think so-and-so should be 10, or so-and-so should be number 1. Do the exercise of sit down with a blank sheet of paper. If you're a big time college football fan, this is a fun exercise and it's kind of instructive. Do the exercise of sitting down with a blank sheet of paper and actually put down who the teams are. Rank them yourself. Start from the top and bottom. You'll find that as you get out of the top 5, 6 teams, it becomes a lot harder to distinguish. Once you get down and you look at the poll, okay, we got 3 teams in the top of the poll. They're undefeated. Then you got Alabama, who's played, great and has the best resume and only 1 loss. Then you have us with only 1 loss. So your 1-loss teams then are Alabama, Georgia, Texas Tech has moved up in there, Ole Miss. You can jumble this order around, Oregon, okay? But then all of a sudden now you're running out of highly ranked 1-loss teams. There's a couple other 1-loss teams. BYU just took its first loss last week, but their schedule's a little weak, and they lost pretty hard. They lost 29-7. In their loss. So they got knocked down all the way down to 12. And Georgia Tech is your only other team out there with 1 loss. And so they lost to an unranked, not super impressive North Carolina State team. It was on the road, but they just gave up a ton of yards and points. And so they went from being undefeated to taking that loss. And their resume is not, they don't have a win. Again, going back to the idea of current top 25 teams, they don't have a win against a current top 25 team. They don't have a win against any. I mean, they beat Clemson earlier in the year, but look, again, Clemson, whatever they were ranked, or if they were ranked when Georgia Tech beat them, I don't remember. Doesn't matter. Clemson's not that team now. Although they did play Friday night. They did play last night, and they were able. Clemson beat Louisville, knocked off Louisville, so on the road. So Clemson with a little bit of resurrection there. So Louisville's down at they're 19th in the AP poll and 20th in the college football playoff poll. They'll probably be bounced out of the poll. And again, so there you go. Louisville was 20th, right? They're 7-2. That's my point is when you get down to around 10 to 25, you got all these teams, maybe a 1-loss team like Georgia Tech and BYU that only have the 1 loss but don't have a very impressive resume. But then you also have a bunch of teams that are 2 losses and also don't have impressive resumes. They a lot of times when you look at some of these 2-loss teams, hey, they're having a good season. They're 8-2, 7-2 at this point in the season. But a lot of times those 2 losses are to the only 2 ranked teams they played. So again, how do you evaluate a team like that? Are they really where do you put them between number 10 and 25? I mean, okay, 8-2, good record, 10 games into the season, but you lost the only two games that you played to ranked teams. You lost to the two best teams you played. So you beat some middling teams. You lost to teams that are clearly better than you. So if those teams are clearly better than you, then we can't elevate you. So it's an interesting exercise. That's all I'm saying. You should really do it, because it's very different when you just look at it and criticize the poll and make sort of cherry picking observations. Like, I can't believe that Miami is up to 15, or Miami is 15 and Notre Dame is 9, and they're both 7-2 and Miami beat Notre Dame. Okay. Yeah, that's a consideration, right? But there's a lot of things to look at in there, and I'm not going to justify that right now. That's not the point of today's podcast, but I will tell you, I've looked inside that. I was kind of miffed about that too. When you dig inside the numbers, not as crazy as it seems. And really, again, what's the difference? Is it that big a difference? Both of those teams have a chance to make the playoff. Do we really think one of them is going to win? I mean, look, a lot of people are high on Notre Dame and say, hey, they had two tough losses to top 25 teams, one on the road, and both by, a field goal or 1 point, missed extra point, Yeah, that's all true. But again, Notre Dame's that team also that has beaten a bunch of meh teams and lost to the two best teams they played. The only thing they got on their resume is they beat currently number 17 USC team. And USC may be a little undervalued. Their metrics suggest that they're probably a pretty strong team. But okay, give them credit for that. Hey, you beat a top 20, a top 15, a top 17 USC team, but you still lost to the current number 3 team and the current number 15 team. So you say, well, those are high ranked. You lost. Okay, we lost to number 3 and number 15. Right. But we're talking about picking a playoff field. We're talking about finding teams that are worthy of playing for the championship. If you played 3 teams against top 25 teams and you only won one of them, and you can't beat the other, you 2 out of 3, you can only beat a top 25 team 1 out of 3 times. How good are you? Do you really? Or what does that say about rankings 9 and 10 through 15, which we tend to esteem as like, hey, they're number 9, they're number 10. We think of that as a great position. But if the team's resumes in those positions are teams that can only beat a top 25 team 1 out of 3 times, and when you look closely at the record, that's pretty much who they are. That's my point. This is a harder exercise than you'd think. All right, I'm going to get off that soapbox, not soap opera, so we can get back to talking about what's going to happen in the game against Texas. So if you've been following me all year, and if you know me or you've known me for a while before I started doing the podcast, and many of you do, you know that my way of breaking down games is not to just stick my finger in the wind and say, I think this is what's going to happen. And it's great when you hear people do a breakdown and they come up with some obscure stat and they say, I think this is going to make the difference. And look, some of these will. I'm going to tell you a couple stats that maybe aren't jumping out at people about this game. But these things are not usually in their own thing going to make or break or be the game. And so what I like to do, and what we're going to do here is we do matchups where we try to make it very analytical. We say, okay, what are the key matchups in this game? You got Georgia's offense versus Texas's defense, and you got Georgia's defense against Texas's offense. And then I lump together special teams and coaching because I think together they have closer to the impact of offense or defense. By themselves, special teams isn't the equal of either offense or defense. And coaching can have in-game coaching, game planning can have some big effects on games. I mean, coaches can, but look, at this level, it's rare that you see people make, pre-game blunders where they just get the whole strategy wrong and they're just beaten from the outset of the game because they didn't know what to do. At this point, most of these coaches can handle that concept and or they make adjustments. So, and then they make decisions during the game. And so, are those decisions wise? Do they make sense? What has been their track record in those games? There's early in Kirby Smart's career, there's a lot of people remember the fake punt against Alabama in 2018 season and in the SEC championship game. And they say, well, that was an ill-conceived play. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But, I think in some ways, Kirby Smart had a reputation of sort of bungling some of the in-game decisions early in his career. The totality of being I think I read this the other day. I think Kirby Smart for his first 10 years so far is 120 and 13. I'm pretty sure is right, or maybe it's 113 and 20. Anyway, it's one of those is so far in his first 10 years, and it's one of the best records of all time for the first 10 years of a coaching career. So kudos to Kirby Smart. And Georgia, by the way, let's just update. Georgia is 61 and 6 since the beginning of the 2021 season, okay, including 2 national championships and some SEC championships in there. So, I mean, that's an amazing record, and the best in the country, by the way, in that time span. So we talked about who Texas is and who they've been the last few years. Well, I know Georgia is a powerful team and a national championship quality team up until the last season or two, but where, still the record since 2021, 61 and 6. That is outstanding. Okay. Just really something to celebrate and be proud of. So anyway, back to this breakdown. So we're going to look at those matchups. So let's jump into it. Georgia, just a little profile on the teams real quick. Georgia is averaging beating. One of the things that's big to me, one of the things I look at, and I made this point before too, but I'll say it again. We are at the point now where statistics might mean something. I love stats. I'm a baseball junkie and I love stats, but college football is very difficult to base a lot on stats until you get about 3/4 of the way, at least halfway through the season. And 1 or 2 games, when you played halfway through the season, even when you played 5 or 6 games, one game can create a huge outlier of statistical data that messes up the data. And that's just the nature of it. Even at this point in the season, look, again, there's only 12 regular season games. So if something unusual happens, large statistical anomaly in the game, Georgia, let's say Georgia, puts 600 yards up, beats Texas 50-10. Okay, puts up 600 yards, holds Texas to 220 yards. Well, I mean, those will radically affect Georgia's stats. Now, they will have earned it, right? Because Texas is a legitimate, high talent level team, top 10 team right now in the rankings, top 10 team talent wise. And so if Georgia puts up those stats and those go into the accumulated record, but that would radically change where Georgia sits right now. Georgia right now is a top 30 offense in terms of total yardage and points scored. They're like 29 in yardage and 32nd in points scored. Georgia, one of the stats though that I was starting to talk about that I believe in the most when you do start to have numbers you can look at in college football is yardage differential. I have the same thing I think when I look at baseball. Nothing is more telling about how a baseball team its record will be than run differential. So, just very simple looking at how many runs do they score and how many do they give up. And so when you have you can, in baseball, there's a formula that you can generally apply to, and it's astoundingly accurate, that will predict very clearly, like if you score this many runs and you give up this many runs, then your record should be this. And football, again, doesn't quite work that way. Only 12 regular season games, but you can tell a lot about what a team is doing on the field by yardage differential. So, you're going to, as an example, the Florida game a couple weeks ago, we beat Florida. We only won the game by 4 points. And I'm sure a bunch of betting people probably thought this was a tough deal. The line was 7 or 7.5 points going into the game, I think, something like that. And the situation was that Georgia, as we talked about this, Gunnar Stockton took a knee on the 1 when he could have, run into the end zone. So we did enough in that game. My point is that last drive would have been in any other part of the game a scoring drive. Gunnar would have easily walked in the end zone. And so we had 24 points. You get the touchdown there, kick the extra point, and you got 31 points. And so Georgia would have won that game 31-21, won by 10. So you would have a 10-point victory. That would have definitely changed the betting outcome. So again, I'm sure the betting world out there was really up in arms about Gunnar taking the knee, because one way or the other, that clearly affected people. And then, but on top of that, as far as how it looks on paper, you put 31 points on the board, you won the game by 2 scores. It changes the look of the game. Statistically speaking, Georgia did enough to do that. But as far as the points came on the, in part, we took those points off the board ourselves by taking a knee. It was the right thing to do strategically because that's the easiest way to end the game. You score the touchdown, even though it's very unlikely that Florida could, score the touchdown, get the 2-point conversion, get the onside kick, and then try to, or just, get the touchdown, do the extra point and score the touchdown, Anyway, you get the idea. Very unlikely scenario they could do all that in a minute, and a half, including an onside kick, and tie the game up or win the game. But, it is within the realm of possibility. However, once you have no timeouts and you're under 2 minutes, and you take a knee, and then you're going to just run out the clock and Florida's never going to touch the ball. And that's a certainty. So, smart move, good way to do it. Suppress the points, changes the way the numbers look. So, but the stats, the yardage differential, even when you do something like that, still shows up in the stats. If you did enough on field to be in that position, then it'll show up in the stats. So at this point in the season, yardage differential is telling. And I like to think of, people will even quote a stat, or there's people talk about game control. But when I talk about game control, I just think of game control in general as how did the team play and how did they control the game. And to me, different stats that you can look at that point to game control are yardage differential. So how many yards did we gain versus how many did we let them gain? Obviously points is something, but but outside of the points, time of possession, first downs, how many first downs did you get? How many did the other team get? How did you do on third down? How did the opponent do on third down? Georgia's teams of 2021 and 2022 and even 2023 were very good at third down. You would see Georgia be anywhere from 45 to 50, 55% conversion on third downs. And in some of those teams held their opponents to under 30%, in the 20s. So when you have that kind of disparity, you have 54% third down conversion, and you hold your opponents to 28%. That's a formula for winning a lot of games. Georgia this year, one of the things that we are elite in, a lot of our stats don't have the elite accumulation that we've seen from the 2021, 22, and 23 teams, but the 2024 team was a good team, obviously made the playoff, was an 11-3 team, won the SEC championship, but was not an elite statistical team. And actually, in many ways, this year's Georgia team is exceeding them. They're doing better. We've talked about that versus the run, both the run offense and the run defense, and the differential between those two. And then you just have yardage differential in general. So right now, Georgia is averaging, winning their games. Their yardage differential on the season is a little over 125 and a half. We're averaging 436 yards on offense, and we're averaging giving up 310. Texas, on the other hand, is nowhere near as powerful. They're actually only a positive yardage differential of 67.8 yards per game. They're averaging 381 yards a game on offense, and they're averaging giving up 313 yards on offense. So it's been said, people talk about how great Texas's defense is, and yet Texas is yielding a few more yards per game than Georgia is. Now, that might not be uncommon when you see a team that's struggling as much as they are on offense, because it means they put their defense on the field a lot more. We talked about that that Tennessee style of the play, for instance, makes it hard for them to get really good defensive statistics, even if they have a pretty good defensive team, because they put their defense on the field so much and put them back out there so quickly. Texas's defense, in terms of scoring defense, is outperforming their numbers, though. They are Texas is in the, where are they? They're in the 30s. I lost them. Let me just see if I can find them real quick. Texas, So again, their defensive, yeah. So they're 22. So we're 20th in the country on total yards allowed on defense, and Texas is 22. So we're actually a little ahead of them. But they are actually, when it comes to points allowed, they're 11th in the country in points allowed. They're only allowing 16.4 points per game. So I was kind of wanted to look at that and say, well, how is that? How do you have such a disparity where they're in the 20s when it comes to total yards allowed, but in points they are? And what I can tell you is Texas is +8 on the season on turnover ratio, turnover margin. So they have gotten 8 turnovers more than they've given. That's a big number for this point in the season. And anything over 2 or 3, being positive 2 to 3 or 4 is really good. Anything in the 8 to 10, 12 for a season is fantastic. And not common, not something you can usually even sustain and do year to year. So Texas has been also really good at, they're one of the top teams in the country at sacking people. So they've had about 34 sacks on the season. So when you look at the games they've won, they've had a ton of sacks, and they've, like the Oklahoma game, they haven't necessarily had a ton of turnovers in all the games, but that 23-6 win over Oklahoma, which is their most impressive win on the season, again, as far as they had some, let's just talk about it real quick. So they had some games earlier this season. Who did they play? So let's go back to their games. So they played, of course, Ohio State to start the season. Then they played 3, cupcake patsy kind of games: San Jose State, UTEP, and Sam Houston. So we're not looking too much at those, and we don't care that much about the stats from those games, what they did offensively and defensively. The Ohio State, that counts, but that was the first game of the season for both teams, and they were both raw, and they were offenses that both struggled, honestly, because both teams had quarterbacks that were just getting started, first-time starters. Julian Sayin at Ohio State has moved from being a little shaky in that first game. They only threw for 170 yards in that game. Ohio State threw for 126 yards in that game. So actually Arch threw for 170. So he out yardaged Julian Sayin. But both of those are pretty rough, right? I mean, you expect your quarterback to go out there and get you a couple hundred yards in a game to help win a game like that, and neither team was able to do that. Well, Sayin is in the Heisman discussion now. He has really progressed as the season's gone, and Arch has progressed. Arch was rough early on. He's I'm not saying he's totally put it all together yet, but he's a lot less rough. In fact, coming into this game, you probably heard a lot of people have made hay of the fact that he's had back-to-back 300-yard plus games with 3 touchdowns or more, and he has. So the offense has really cranked it up. Texas only had they got 472 yards against San Jose State. They put up 607 yards against Sam Houston. Again, do we care? Not much. And then other than that, until the last 2 weeks, they hadn't had another game where they exceeded 400 yards. But in the last 2 games, they've had exactly 428 yards in both of the last 2 games. And that's against Mississippi State and Vanderbilt. So they, all of a sudden, their offense has come to life, and that's largely been because of Manning, because he has been able to throw for 328 yards in one game and 356 in the other. So, close to 700 yards and 6 or 7 touchdowns in those games, and generally roughly around a 65, 66, 68% completion percentage. So much better play from the quarterback. They've needed it because their run game really has been non-existent all year, and that's been one of the big weaknesses of this team too, and something you have to consider when you're talking about where is Arch and his development. Arch was, I mentioned offensive line. If you're going to give a first-time starter, the reins to an offense, you'd like to think that the line can keep them from being under duress. They've had some trouble with the offensive line early in the season. It's getting better, just like our offensive line. We had trouble, and it's getting better. But what they have not been able to do that we've been able to do this year is they haven't been able to run the ball. They're barely averaging over 100 yards a game. And even though they had over 400 yards of offense in each of the last 2 games, they ran for just 100 yards even in the last game and only 72 yards in the game before that. You go back to the game against Kentucky, which they barely won. They went on the road and beat Kentucky in overtime, 16-13. Arch did not have a particularly good game. He was 12 of 27. That's a 44% completion percentage, threw for 132 yards, and they only ran for 47 yards. So they only had 179 yards total of offense. So I've been trying to work this up this whole time. I'll just tell you, this has taken me a long time to come to grips with what I think is going to happen and come to a prediction of this game. Because Texas, as much as people feel this way about us, we've been all over the place, not what people expected, maybe a little disappointing, but then at times look great. Texas is a true enigma. I mean, they are all over the place. Yes, they've had a pair of 400-yard offensive games, and Arch is, like I said, thrown for over 300 yards in each of the last couple games, 6 or 7 touchdowns, and I don't think any interceptions. I don't see that anyway. But and good completion percentage. But then they can't run the ball, and they haven't been. And they had both of their main running backs from last year coming back, and much like us, Arch has figured prominently. He's their second or third leading rusher on the season, so he's figured prominently in their run game. So they have a quarterback who can help them out, but it hasn't really balanced it out. They're averaging less than 4 yards per carry on the season, and generally just has not been very impressive. The only thing that's really helped them in that regard is they counterbalance that by having one of the best rushing defenses in the country. They're in the top 5, top 8 in the country, holding teams to about 70 yards a game. So that's going to be a big matchup for us, right? Because one of the things we've been doing really well is running the ball. So we're going to have to address that a little bit. Again, little preview here as we start to break it down. That gives you some ideas of what they're doing. But big picture idea, the Texas offense is averaging only 380 yards on the season, and that's after a pair of 400-yard plus games in their last 2 games. So they have not been particularly good. And in SEC play, they're only averaging about 390. So they're averaging, they're averaging, or it's less than, I guess I was going to say they're averaging 395 yards a game. I don't know. Yeah. Well, I guess they are because they had these 400-yard games recently. So anyway, they're averaging less than 400 yards on offense, whether it's in SEC play or not. And, against Florida, they were only able to put up about 341. So this has been their last 5 games. They lost to Florida 29-21, and they put up 341 yards of total offense. They beat Oklahoma, but they did that only putting up 302 total yards of offense. They beat them 23-6, and that was largely on the fact that they played excellent defense. They held Oklahoma to 258 yards of total offense, and they had 3 turnovers that they got against Oklahoma. And so that really helped them turn the tide of that game. But then they go on the road, and they play Kentucky, and again, as I just said, they eked out an overtime win, 16-13. They only had 179 yards of offense, and interestingly enough, Kentucky really should have won that game. Kentucky moved the ball really well on Texas defense. They got 395 yards of offense, but couldn't get the ball in the end zone or even enough field goals to win the game. So, but they outgained. They outgained Texas by quite a lot, over 120 yards, which is a big number. Again, Georgia's averaging 120 yards of positive yardage differential in the season, which is about, I made a little chart and I put these together. That makes Georgia about 16th best in the country when you look at yardage differential. And I don't have enough time right now because I want to just finish breaking down the game. But yardage differential is another one of those things you have to look at with some relative, because you got to look at, if you're playing a bunch of weak teams, then you're going to pile up big yardage differential, right? If your conference is weak and you play your conference schedule, you have big yardage differential. And yet, I will say it's pretty instructive. I mean, the top 25 teams largely mirror their ability in yardage differential, mirrors where they are in the rankings and where they are in the standings. And so the best teams in the country, regardless of who they're playing on their schedule, do pile up yardage differential. And so Texas, that's what I was going to say, is Texas hasn't been averaging, they've only been averaging in SEC play about 335 yards a game on offense. They've been averaging giving up 395 yards a game on offense, and that's been defense. And that's been surprising because, again, the story coming into the season and the story throughout the season has been Texas has a great defense. Texas has a great defense. And again, they're number 11 in points allowed. So when you look up there and you say, well, okay, they're almost top 10 in points allowed. But when you look at the yardage, they're giving up more yardage than we are. And when you actually look inside the games, in those first 4 games they played, they had that first game against Ohio State, which again, I think you can attribute a lot of what happened in both teams, barely getting much of any yardage on the day, to being a pair of first-time starters playing in a huge game under a lot of pressure. But they held Ohio State, even though Ohio State won the game, they held Ohio State to 203 yards offense. That's fantastic. We would take that every day, right? Then they played their 3 patsies, and they only gave up 269, 259, and 113 to Sam Houston. So they really padded their stats in there. They were holding teams well under 250 yards a game at that point in the season through those first 4 games. But then they got into SEC play, and they started SEC play with the loss to Florida, and they gave up 457 yards to Florida. And you saw Florida when we played them. Florida's offense is not good. Okay. Florida, is not able to do a ton on offense, despite having a talented quarterback and some talented pieces. They just haven't been able to put it together this year. But they did it against Texas. They put up 457 yards offense, 29 points, and won the game. In fact, the only game that Texas has looked good in SEC play, or since those first 4 games defensively, is the Oklahoma game, where again they held Oklahoma under 300 yards. But part of how they did that is they picked up 3 turnovers. And so that, Oklahoma just kept shooting themselves in the foot and stalling their own drives. So, but then Kentucky, who also is not a good offensive team, you saw them when we played them, and they're not good offensively. They're getting better. They have a young quarterback who's growing, but they put up 395 yards, almost 400 yards of offense against the vaunted Texas defense. And then Mississippi State, 445 yards. Vanderbilt, 423 yards. Now, Vanderbilt is one of the top 15 offensive teams in the country, and State is a top 35 offensive team. But the perception was that Texas's defense is better than that. And again, those same 5 games offensively, against Florida, Texas only managed 341 yards, which isn't bad because Florida's defense is really good, and we didn't put up a ton more than that. But then they put up 302 yards against Oklahoma's defense, which again, that's a low. 300. If you get held to 300, there's a good chance you're going to lose a game. But the turnovers made a big difference for them, and so they didn't have to put up a ton of offense. The 179 yards and managing to beat Kentucky on the road in overtime, getting outgained. Having only put up 179 yards of offense and giving up almost 400. That's astounding. I don't know how they pulled that Houdini trick. I didn't see that game close enough or not. And then these last 2 games, they put up 428 yards of offense in each of those games, but they actually were outgained. They gave by about 10 yards. They gave up 445 to Mississippi State and 423 to Vanderbilt. They gained 428 in both of those games. So they were slightly outgained in those games, and the scores show it. They were close. Again, these numbers aren't just random numbers. They do point to the flow of the game. They beat Mississippi State in overtime by 7 points. They scored the touchdown, and State failed to score in the overtime. So they won by 7, and then they beat Vanderbilt by 3 points. Now, they had that game under control. They were ahead against Vanderbilt by 17 points late in the game, and Vanderbilt put on a big rally, and had to go for the onside kick. So Vanderbilt scores to come within 3 with a minute or 2 to go, and is going for the onside kick. So it wasn't. Those 1-score games sometimes look a little deceptive, again, on paper, right? Like Texas generally had, done a good job of holding Vandy off. And that was because Vandy had some turnovers early in the game, and Texas was able to get a lot of sacks against Vandy. So again, another one of those tricky stats I'll throw out as we're breaking this down. In Texas is in the top 5, top 8 in the country in sacks, 34 sacks or more on the year. In the 2 games that they lost this season, 0 sacks. They had no sacks against Florida and no sacks against Ohio State. So, they are +8 on turnovers. They used 3 of those. They were just on the Oklahoma game, which helped propel them to their biggest and best win of the season. Not only because Oklahoma was a ranked team, but also they won that game by 17. And again, I'm throwing out San Jose, UTEP, and Sam Houston. I don't care about those. So their other games that they've won, they eked out the 3-point overtime win in Kentucky. They eked out a 1-score game win over Mississippi State in overtime, and they eked out a 3-point win against Vanderbilt, which Vanderbilt pulled up late, but still their defense gave up those yardage. So the perception, and so those sacks and those turnovers is the answer, going back to the question I sort of posited a few minutes ago. How is Texas giving up, still in the top 20, 25 in total yardage allowed defensively, but in the top 11 in the country in points allowed? And the answer is they've made a lot of hay in key games with sacks and turnovers that has sort of exploded them a little bit past what their defensive numbers, which are very good. I mean, again, overall, their defense is very similar to ours in terms of yardage allowed. They're a little bit more than us. They're allowing a little bit more than us. And they're allowing teams to have the ball a little bit more. Teams are averaging getting about 70-something plays a game. And so that's another one of those game control stats I like to talk about. How many plays do you run versus how many do they run? What's your time of possession? How many first downs do you get? Georgia, I started to say before, Georgia is elite in first down. Georgia is in the top 10 in the country in first downs gained, almost 26 first downs a game, and we're in the top 30 or so at keeping teams down in first downs. So we've created a differential in first downs, even though we have led a lot of teams, like you might remember Alabama going 8 for 8 on their first three third down conversions before the defense clamped down. And of course you remember Ole Miss going 5 for 5 on their first 5 drives and scoring 5 touchdowns, which made that game a tight contest. Even though statistically, as that game went on, Georgia racked up over 500 yards of offense, held Ole Miss to under 400, about 350 or so, well below their average, outgained Ole Miss by about 160 yards, but Ole Miss's efficiency of scoring touchdowns and not settling for field goals made a big difference. So, all right. So what does that leave us? So I've given you all the stats kind of in advance. So let's just walk quickly through the matchups. Georgia's offense versus Texas's defense. So coming into this, people would tell you, look, if Texas is going to win, or where Texas could be a problem for Georgia, Texas has a great defense. They create a lot of sacks. They get after people. They create turnovers, and they have a great defense. They're holding people to only 16 and something points a game, which is top 10, top 15 in the country. And overall, their defensive metrics put them in the top 25. All of that is true. However, when you separate out, and excuse me a second while I take a sip again from the chalice of champions. All of that is true. But when you look at Texas and SEC play, you take those four games out, including the Ohio State game, because of, like I said, early season jitters. Let's set that one aside for a moment. You look at what they've done in SEC play, and against Florida, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt. So judge for yourself how you feel about those teams compared to us. And you say, okay, in SEC play, Texas is allowing 395 yards of offense to their opponents, not 310. And in SEC play, Texas is allowing, on average, teams are scoring. Let me see. I lost track of that. Just in those 5 SEC games, I'll tell you, their opponents are averaging almost 23 and a half points a game. So Texas has won. They've won 4 out of 5 of those games. They lost to Florida, but Texas is winning those games. Overall, Texas is winning games by about the same margin as we are in the season, about 13.2 points a game overall. So not just a little under 2 touchdowns a game, Texas wins by on the season. We score a little more, but give up a little more. They hold people to a little less, score a little less. They score like 29.6 a game, but hold people to 16.5. We score 33.5 a game and hold people to 19.5. So we're both in that just under 14 points a game. That's our average win. But in their 5 SEC games, Texas is winning just under 28 to 24. So they're winning by about 4 points in those 4 games, including the loss to Florida, and they're giving up almost 400 yards of offense while only generating about 335 yards of offense. So that's why 2 of those 5 games, one of them's, of those 5 games, when you look at it that way, that kind of explains why, they're all close games. They're all, except for the Oklahoma game, which they had a bunch of sacks and 3 turnovers. Otherwise, when they got no sacks against Florida and had an equal number of turnovers, they lost to Florida. When they got sacks and maybe a turnover here or there in the Kentucky or Mississippi State game, but they were outgained in those games, which is why those games went to overtime, and then Texas was able to pull them out in overtime. And I think one thing that helps, Georgia's been able to pull out these close games, and this is where, talent used to be, the talent accumulation we keep talking about that we don't have anymore, used to be we could overwhelm people and just build. By the time you get to the end of the game, we just kind of pummeled people with just wave after wave of talent, right? Well, Texas is in that same boat. They're nearly as talented as us. They're a top 5 talent team. And I think that's why you see, look, they were able to get those games to overtime and then they won them. It's not something magical. When you got down to brass tacks at the end of the game, it's an overtime situation. Doesn't mean it's always going to work this way, but Texas did have the advantage of being more talented across the board than those teams. So when it comes down to one little play here, one little play there that might make the difference in overtime, Texas had what it needed to get it done. But overall, they were outgained in those games, and so they were dead against Mississippi State. So without a punt return for a touchdown on State's second to last drive of the game, Texas probably loses that game. And I didn't see the Kentucky game, so I have no idea what happened there, other than the fact that I just keep marveling at the idea that Kentucky put up 400 yards of offense and held Texas to under 200 yards. So I keep saying 120 yards. They outgained it by 220 yards. Math is off in my head there. So that's poor Kentucky, to outgain Texas at home by over 200 yards and fail to win the game. That's just terrible. So I think that our offense by contrast has been humming. We've had over 500 yards of offense in 2 of our last 3 games. And like I said, we're outgaining teams about 125 yards a game, where Texas is about 68 yards a game. And in our last couple games, we have scored, or in our last 5 games, we've scored 35, 20, 43, 24, and 41. Now that 24, the second 24, and that was the Florida game. Like I said, we could have easily scored 31 there. We took a knee. But we had the ability to do that. The Auburn game, Auburn really did suppress our offense. Auburn choked us down. And they have a really great defense. You go back and look at how they've been playing. They probably aren't getting the kind of hype that Texas is. Texas is getting a lot of hype for having a great defense, but I'm not sure that they're really playing that great. And Texas is not controlling games really either. They have about an even time of possession. And like I said, their opponents are generally running more plays on offense than they are. So, and their opponents are not running the ball very well. That's the one thing they are doing, but they're not running the ball well either. So that's one of the downsides, is it's come down to the game has been on Arch Manning's arm for most of these games because they just haven't been able to consistently run the ball. So our offense against their defense, we're going to be at home. We've had a lot of momentum. I have made this point several times. I did in the last game that I thought Gunner would look, Gunner has been exactly what this offense needs. It doesn't mean he's the best quarterback in the country. He's going to win the Heisman Trophy, but he doesn't really take lost yardage plays. This is a strength on strength matchup in the sense that Texas's defense and our offense, Texas gets a lot of sacks. We give up less sacks than almost anybody. And some of that's on Gunner. It wasn't that our offensive line was so great in the year. It's just Gunner doesn't take sacks. Gunner, when the play breaks down, he gets out of there and he usually gets positive yardage. So one thing we've avoided this season, last year we had a lot of plays where poor Carson maybe was under duress or he missed the first down pass. Then they tried to run in an obvious running play and the second down play, run up the middle, and they lose a yard or gain a yard. And so then you got Carson Beck dropping back with a little bit of a shaky line play last year. With in 3rd and 10. Well, Gunner this year in that same scenario, he misses the first down pass on 2nd down. If the play is not there, he runs for 3, 4, 5, 8 yards, and you have 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 2, and again, we're picking those up. We're in the top 9 or 10 in the country and picking up first downs. So the offense holds onto the ball. We're top 10 in the country in time of possession, and we're in the top 30 in points and yardage. So the offense grinds it out. We have not been an explosive play. We're only in the top 50 or 60 when you talk about explosive plays. We moved up some after last week because we had some nice explosive plays last week. We'd been in the 70s. Now we're up in the 50s or 60s. But we grind out. We just keep moving the ball, keep getting first downs, moving the ball, and putting points on the board. And I see nothing in the stats that Texas's defense, if they can't stop Florida from getting over 450 yards, if they can't stop Mississippi State and Vanderbilt from getting over 420 yards, if they can't stop Kentucky from getting over 400 yards, then I don't see any reason to believe that Georgia playing at home under the lights with the hyped up crowd and a Georgia team that's been putting up 30 or 40 points a game and over 400 yards a game, actually over 500 yards a game in 2 of the last 3 games. I don't see any reason to think that Georgia doesn't put up 450 yards and 20, a minimum of 28, 29 points, and maybe 31 to 38 points in this game. So I think the Georgia offense is going to win the matchup with the defense, the Texas defense. And by win, I mean I think that our offense will basically live up to its recent averages. Maybe it won't be as high. Maybe Georgia only puts up 430 yards and 27 or 28 points. I'm still going to call that a win because that's going to exceed what people would think of as Texas's average, certainly in points and definitely in overall yardage. Maybe not actually so much in terms of SEC play, but I don't see any reason to think we'll do any worse than the conglomerate of those 5 SEC teams I mentioned, especially playing at home with a lot of momentum. We would have to, like I've said in other games, we would have to make those mistakes ourselves. We would have to stop ourselves. And really the worst game we've played offensively recently was the Florida game, where, and I talked about this in the breakdown of the Florida game, when the offense was good, they knifed right through Florida. They had several, they didn't set up, they only had 1 field goal, 3 touchdown drives out of 4 scoring drives. That 5th drive could have been a scoring drive, but we took the knee, and they just marched through them. They scored long touchdown drives and just did it pretty well. It was the other drives where we just didn't play well. We weren't sharp. We had some penalties. We made some mistakes. We missed some plays, and we took more 3 and outs, and we punted more. We punted like 6 times in the game, and we had punted like 0 times in the game before that. So, that was, and we had a turnover. We had an interception deep on our side of the field, but on the season, Gunner's only thrown 2 interceptions. He's had like 1 fumble. Frazier had some fumble trouble early, but he has really played well and held on to the ball since then. And so generally speaking, while Georgia has a -2 turnover ratio on the season, I've made this point before. Some of that is us taking some chances, like when Puglisi came in against Tennessee right before the half and throws a Hail Mary to try to get the ball towards the end zone, and it was picked off. So we've had a couple instances like that. Our regular offense, our first team offense against other defenses, we've basically been even on the turnover ratio. So unless we do something dramatically out of character, play really poorly, make a bunch of mistakes, and turn the ball over more than once, several times, especially deep in our own territory, then I think our offense, like I said, I expect them to grind out. I think the minimum they'll do is 28 points, 27, 28 points, and about 425, 430 yards of offense against Texas defense. But I think actually it's more likely that it's more like 34 to 38 points and 450 plus yards of offense. I think that's more what we'll see out of our offense, and that's going to be a win in that matchup. Then you have the matchup of Georgia's defense versus Texas's offense. Georgia's defense has been an area of concern this year, but as I've made this point several times, statistically, it's actually been a better defense than last year's defense. And some of that is because last year's defense was not particularly great at anything. They weren't bad at any. I mean, they did sack teams at a pretty high rate. They were upper third sack team because we had 2 first, second round draft pass rushers, that are playing in the NFL right now. So they did a pretty good job of getting pressure, but they were not great against the run. They gave up too much against the run. This year's team has really cranked it down against the run. We're currently giving up a little more on the run as the season has gone on, and I think one of the things that's hurting us now is having lost Jordan Hall in the middle. We're probably going to see that run defense bleed out a little bit, but the rest of the guys are stepping up and still playing really well. We were holding teams to about 90 yards a game before the State game. State got 149 yards. That bumped the average up to we're giving up just right at 100 yards a game. But we ourselves are running for almost 200 yards a game, 197 yards a game. So in the flow of the game and in game control, Georgia's still owning the run game. And these matchups are going to favor Georgia in this game because Texas has not been able to run the ball at all. And so I think our defense will continue that trend for them because that's what our defense does best. What our defense has done best on the season, they do not create a lot of turnovers. They do not get a lot of sacks. They haven't had a tremendous amount of pressure on quarterbacks, although we did get 3 sacks in the last game against State. What our defense has done well, though, is we have done a great job of stuffing the run against everybody, and we've done a good job of keeping the plays in front of us. We are not high up in the rankings of explosive offensive plays. I made mention we're like 50th, 60th in the country, but we're actually in the top third of the country, maybe even higher, maybe top 25, top 20. I forgot what exact ranking is, but somewhere in that range of suppressing explosive plays. And that includes playing 2 of the most explosive offenses in the country this year in Ole Miss and Tennessee. Both of those are teams that are averaging close to 500 yards and in the top 10 or 15 in the country in explosive plays. And so we've played those teams already, and we are still in the top 25, top 30 in the country at suppressing big plays. So Texas is not a big play offense. It's not going to go well for them. And, our defense against their offense should be able to continue suppressing the run and should be able to continue keeping them from having any particular big plays. In fact, I've seen some charts that showed the recent success for Texas's offense has been to focus on short passes, a lot of screen passes or a lot of short passes, close, easy completions close to the line, and letting their talented wide receivers make plays down the field. And of course, we're familiar with that. We've done a lot of that too. Our defense has been weaker this year on tackling, but overall, that has probably worked better for Texas against Mississippi State and Vanderbilt than it's going to work against Georgia. Even though we've been a little shaky on defense and our tackling's been a little off, it's been improving as the season goes. And overall, you still have all that 4 or 5-star talent. You still have a tremendous amount of speed on the outside. So it's not a great game plan. And Sarkisian's offenses have always been that way. We have fared well against his offenses because his offenses have always done well, made quarterbacks look good, made wide receivers look good, but he does feature keeping it simple, keeping a lot of plays that are close to the line, quick passes, let guys make plays on the outside, and against a talented, fast, well-reacting defense like Georgia defenses usually are, those plays are not quite as available and they don't yield as much yardage. Against Mississippi State, you throw that play and you maybe get a 20-yard or an 8-yard or a 7-yard gain. Against Georgia, you might turn that play into a loss. You see the Georgia defense often turns quick passes lateral to the line or screen passes. You see the Georgia defense often turn those into lost yardage plays. And if not, definitely short yardage plays. And again, their run game hasn't been able to do anything, so I don't expect them to just bust out in this game. And, the one place where we have been hurt, and the reason State was able to get over 150 yards of rushing last week was their backup quarterback, who has really good legs, got into the game, and he ran for about 50, 70, 80 yards. And a lot of them were on like 3rd and long scrambles where we didn't do a good job of contain. And this is where our defense is still needs to step up and improve. So if Texas gets some run plays, it's going to be from Arch, and it's going to be Arch scrambling. And more often than not, they will run some design run plays for Arch. But if we put him under pressure and make him get on the run, like we did last year, and that's where we were successful. We stuffed their run. We put them under a lot of pressure last year. We cut down their quick, easy plays, and we held them for no gain, and we put them under some pressure, and we were able to get some turnovers at the game in Texas especially, and that's what allowed us to jump out to a big lead early. So I would say at home, our defense has a chance of looking like the best version of themselves, playing a night game at home against, while Manning has been good in the last couple games. And I think our defense has also been getting better. They might get a little more pressure in this game. I think they're going to come in juiced. And I just don't think that there's anything to the improvement in Texas's offense lately. I think that has a lot to do with who they're playing in Mississippi State. Just like our offense, you got to look at, that's what I've been saying, you got to look at our improvement last week and say, hey, we were playing State. Well, they were playing State too. Now, they almost lost to State. We blew State away. And Vanderbilt, again, has a nice 8-2 season. They're a top 15, top 25 style team, but they're not a great defensive team. They have built that on the back of their offense. Their offense is putting up 40 points a game and 450 yards. They're a top 25 offensive team, and they're just at a top half of the college football world defense, not super great. So, Texas, I'm not saying it means nothing. It's always good when you put up numbers regardless of who it is. And so it's good that Texas was able to move the ball. But I think what they were able to do to move the ball recently, our coaches will be ready for, and unless they have some new wrinkles and surprises, will be harder. Now, they probably will. Sarkisian's a great coach. I've talked about this coming into it, and this leads us to our last matchup, which is coaching and special teams. Sarkisian's a great coach. He's a great offensive mind. And I like the fact that he does try to simplify games and make it easy for his quarterbacks to get good, easy completions and let his athletes make plays in space. That's a smart move. Don't make it hard on yourself. Why go for the impossible 30-yard pass over 3 defenders downfield when you can just get the ball quickly out to a really talented wide receiver or running back with some blocking? Let them make some plays, right? So get some positive yardage. And then once you get the defense thinking about what you're doing, then you can start changing it up on them. You can do some misdirection. Then you can hit them for a long pass when they're not expecting it. You can break off a run out of the shotgun or out of a delayed run. So Sarkisian knows this, and he will have some good plays. They will script, and like a lot of teams have, I wouldn't be surprised if their first 1 or 2 or 3 offensive series go decent or pretty well. I also wouldn't be surprised, honestly, under the lights at night, juiced up with the crowd, and the recent successes, I wouldn't be surprised if the defense comes out on fire and looks a lot like, I think it could go either way. I think the defense could come out looking a lot like the defense that started at Texas last year and just took it to them in the first half and jumped them for a big lead early. That could happen in this game too. And so I think it could go either way, but either way, I think whether our defense wins, how you define that, I think that Texas maybe is able, I think our defense might hold them to 250 yards and under 20 points, but I think it's also believable that they continue to progress on offense with the week off to prepare, that Sarkisian has a few aces up his sleeve. They pull out a few good plays here and there. They get a couple chunk plays that help them score on one drive, and maybe they get a couple drives on a couple other drives. So maybe they get to 21 points, something like that. So I think that's, I think they make the most of limited opportunities. I can see them getting maybe 325, 340 yards of offense. And again, 17, 21 points, something in that range. I guess I would still call that a win. That would be certainly better. That would be enough for Georgia to win. And I would say that's a winning matchup overall. Although that's not a lights out performance if that's how it goes. It's not, they held them to 210 yards and 3 points, So back to coaching and special teams. So I think Sarkisian is a great coach. I think he will do all he can to prepare his team, but I think he's got a few less things cooking right now at this point in the season than Kirby Smart does. His team is playing with a little bit of momentum, it feels like, because they've won 5 in a row. But again, if you listen to what I described those games as, I won't go back and repeat it. I mean, you got a loss to Florida, a great win against Oklahoma in a neutral site but mostly built on the back of sacks and turnovers. And then in the games where you didn't dominate with those, you ended up in overtime games with Kentucky and Mississippi State and a close game against Vanderbilt. And you finally put up some yards on offense the last 2 games, but you gave up more yards on offense in those 2 games than you had all season. So there's some give take there that wasn't quite working for them. And so in general, I don't know how much momentum they really have, even though they've jumped up to number 10 in the rankings. Like I said, I made that point before. They got back into the bottom of the top 25. They had the Oklahoma win, and they leapt from 20 to 13, and then they moved up from 13 to 10 just by not losing because they didn't play last week, and other people did. So, again, I think they're kind of in that position where they're 10th because somebody has to be 10th, and they've got the talent and they've got the capability, and they do have a win against a top 15 Oklahoma team, to their credit. And, they have beaten some, they are, what do you call it? They are 4-1 in the SEC right now with 3 games to go. So I think coaching is about, I think, again, as I keep saying every time, at this point, Kirby's going to get the benefit of the doubt almost every time. That's what happens when you go 61-6 in your last 5 3/4 seasons and win 2 national championships and some SEC championships. And you pull off close game after close game, comeback after comeback. So I think you got to give the edge to Kirby, but I think that Sarkisian has definitely got some coaching. When it comes to special teams, I don't know. I did not take a look at what kind of return game they have, what kind of punt game they have. What I can tell you is I did notice that their field goal kicker has missed 4 field goals on the season. He's 14 of 18. They have settled for more field goals than us. We are 12 of 13 on the season, and they are 14 of 18. So they have attempted 5 more field goals than we have. So they have missed, and the kicker missed 2 in one game and then 1 in each of the last 2 games. So in his last 4 or 5 games, he's missed 4 kicks. And Peyton Woodring did miss his first kick either in 2 years on a kick that was under 40 yards or under 50 yards. He's missed the 1 on the season, and that's it. But otherwise, he's been lights out. He's been a little shaky. All of a sudden, he's had 4 kicks out of bounds on kickoffs, resulting in giving the other team the ball at the 35, the automatic penalty where the team gets the ball at 35. I don't know what that's about. He's usually displays an easy ability. He's had some games where every ball was a kick touchback, and that's what I expect from him. I don't know why he struggled recently on hitting the ball out of bounds just inside the corner. Maybe trying to aim for that corner a little too much. I don't know the coaching significance of that. I don't know why you don't just more or less kick it down the middle if you can. I guess if you leave the ball in the middle, there's the risk that there's a return. If you don't get it in the end zone or there's a gust of wind or something. However, if you go straight down the middle, it's also straighter. If you're kicking to the corner, that angle is longer. There's a few more yards in that, trying to get the ball to the corner than there is. But I guess even if the ball comes up just short of the end zone, but it's towards that corner, then the fielding player has to go over to that corner and field it, and now you've pinned him in against the sideline. I guess that's the way we coach it and the way we try it. But he's now had 4 kicks that have gone out of bounds, and we need to stop that because that, it's basically a 10-yard penalty because, they would have gotten the ball at the 25, and now you're giving them the ball at the 35. And, that gives them a little bit of plus momentum, and we've seen that hurt us a little bit in the last couple games. So, but other than the 125-yard punt against Florida that we talked about extensively and how that hurt us, Brett Thorson continues to be a weapon, downing the ball inside the 20, just flipping the field and punting in general. So again, I don't care how good their punter is. He's not going to out-punt Thorson. He could be as good as Thorson, but that's about as best as you can hope for. So I think there's a slight edge when you add up the coaching and special coaching to Kirby, because he gets the benefit of the doubt on all those things, although I think Sarkisian brings a lot to the table. And I think he's gotten better the older he's gotten, and you can see that in his record. He coached at Washington, he coached at USC, and they had a bunch of 7-6 and 8-5 teams, and now he's had back-to-back seasons of 12 and 13 wins here at Texas. And he could still get to 10 wins, he could still get to a playoff, he could still get beyond 10 wins in this season. So he's earned a certain credibility in the coaching world, and certainly as an offensive mind. And I think we'll see him pull out some tricks in this game that'll give him a few moments of great, but not enough. And I do think that their special teams, no matter how good their punter is and anything, and their kick return game, they definitely have settled for more field goals and gotten shakier results from that than Georgia has, with 4 misses in your last 5 games or so. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. So when you listen to it that way, when you break it down, those key matchups, I think Georgia is going to exceed averages against Texas, what Texas expects to yield on defense. I think Georgia will exceed that. I think Georgia can hold what Texas has been able to do recently on offense. I think they can keep Texas from getting 430 yards and 30 points in the game. I think the offense can do that. That's what Texas has done the last couple games. That's what they expected to do on the season. On the whole, on the season, they're really not. They're only averaging 380 yards a game and under 30 points a game. And even worse, in SEC play, they're actually only averaging about 335 yards a game and 27 points a game. So I think that's right on line. I think that's where I think Georgia, I guess you could say that Texas, I don't know if it's a win or just a draw if Texas gets 335 yards and 23 points, because that would be right at their SEC averages in their first 5 games. So either way, we could live with a draw in that scenario. And I think the special teams nod will go to Georgia if it comes down to field goal kicking, especially. So that's the matchups. Those are your 3 key matchups that give you your analytics to look at. And we've thrown a lot of stats and numbers around that, and hopefully that gives you some context. So now we're down to the part where we say, well, there's 3 true outcomes in every game, right? When you go into a game, there's 3 things that could happen. You could get blown out, you could blow the other team out, or it could be a close game. And so a blowout, as I keep defining it, is 3 scores or more, so 17 points or above. 16 points is still 2 touchdowns, 2 2-point conversions. I'll technically call that 2 scores. 17 points, you need 2 touchdowns and a field goal. So anything from 17 up is 2 scores. So a close game is going to be, and early in the year, like on the Alabama game, I define the close game as this game's going to be within 3 points either way, and it's kind of a coin flip. It could go either way. And that's how it went. We lost by 3 points. So I think that this version of close game is just a 1 or 2 score game. And that's what I've said the last 2 or 3 games, so that's what I'm going to define as. So let's talk about the scenarios and what are the possibilities. And I like to give these a formula, a ranking, say what do we think it is. So what is the percentage chance that Texas can blow Georgia out? Scenario number 1. I think the percentage chance anybody can blow Georgia out has been proved by this Georgia team. Nobody's cut the head off the snake, as Josh Pate has been saying on his college football podcast. Kirby himself defining it as we're hard to kill. It just doesn't. There's nothing about what I've described about Texas. Texas has the talent. So if everything went their way, if we have 2 or 3 turnovers, especially 1 or 2 deep in our own territory, or a pick 6, a fumble, scoop and score for a touchdown, and then we can't get the ball, and so if we do a couple 3 and outs and a couple turnovers, and Texas is able to get some offense going on the short field, then yeah, Texas maybe could build a 21-0 lead on scoring 3 times on short fields and 1 drive, and we do nothing. But do you think the game would end that way? Do you see Texas building on that from there to just go on and end up winning 48 to 10, like Alabama has done to us and others? No, I don't think that's going to happen. I think the hard to kill comes to light. I think we fight back. We're at home. We got the crowd. And no matter what happens, no matter how big we'd get down, I think we get it back under 3 scores. So I think the scenario that Texas could blow us out, I said 5% against Mississippi State. I'll give it 10% against Texas because they're more talented. I think they're actually more challenged to be able to pull that off because of. I drink again from the chalice of champions. Anyway, I think they're more challenged to actually pull it off because they're less dynamic on offense than State was. But I'll just, because they're more talented, I'll give it 10%. What is the chance Georgia can blow Texas out? I think pretty good, actually. I mean, I'm going to put this one, I think maybe 35% against State that we could have a blowout. And I said 5% State could blow us out and 35% we could blow them out. And I think that number holds here. I think we're playing better. Again, 500 yards of offense in 2 of our last 3 games, consistently scoring, not making a lot of key mistakes. Even in the Florida game when we made mistakes, we were able to overcome them and play against a team that honestly was playing more comprehensive defense than Texas has been playing, even though the perception is Texas's defense is really good. So I think, again, with the home juice and the energy, I just think the matchup is one that we saw last year seems to favor us and go pretty well. What we do well, what Texas does well, we're able to counteract what they're able to do well. And I've seen a lot from our offense. I think our offense can, I don't think, well, look, again, their defense is largely built on sacks and turnovers, and we don't turn the ball over and we don't give up sacks. And I don't expect Texas to be able to force that hand. I think they've been able to do that against lesser talented teams. I think Gunnar Stockton, even if our line struggles, stays out of stacks. And I just don't see them forcing us into 2 or 3 turnovers, which is what they would need. So instead, I see our offense being able to move. And like I said, I think our offense is going to combination of grind and pretty good plays. I think they'll consistently move the ball. I think they're going to put up somewhere between 28 to 34 points, maybe 38 points. I think they'll get over 400 yards, 450 yards of offense. And that's going to bring blowout into play if the defense can do their part. That's where the blowout's going to come into play, is does the defense do its part? Can it step up and get pressure, make Arch uncomfortable, make this big stage, which again has been a little bit of an Achilles heel for him. Even though he's played better lately and he's getting better, can they make the big stage, the bright lights and the light show and all the loud crowd, can they make it a little much for him? And if they can do that, then the blowout is definitely in play. I'm tempted to even bump the number to 40% on that. But let's just be safe and let's say 35%. So we have 40% scenarios exist in either they blow us out or we blow them out. And 35% of that lives on the Georgia side. So that leaves us 60% chance that it's going to be a 1 or 2 score game. And that seems about right. Texas is talented enough to come in and play and keep it a 10 to 14 point game, even if they lose. And I think I think that's the lion's share of where this goes. I think I'm building towards this idea that I think Georgia is going to win this game. And so I see the potential that it's it could be like a lot of the other games we played where it's kind of a 7 or 10 point game, a 3 to 7 point game back and forth early. I think eventually Georgia would pull away from that, maybe get to a 10 to 14 point lead. Maybe Texas builds it back to a score and then Georgia pulls it away and ends up winning by 11 or 10 or 14. But I think that's the 60% scenario. And I think that Georgia, in that playing at home, with the advantage of, probably able to move the ball offensively. If Georgia is able to do what I said offensively and able to just play even on defense, meaning hold Texas kind of to what they've done in SEC play so far, then at home with the special teams and the other thing going their way, then it ought to point to a 7 to 10 to 14 point win for Georgia. And if things go a little bit better their way, then more like a 13 to 14 to 17 point win. So I think that's the 60% scenario, is it's that 1 to 2 score game. And I think Georgia has a, playing at home under the lights, 70 or 80% chance of winning that scenario. So I didn't do the math on that before, but I guess if you had let's say you had a 75% chance of of 60%. So that's 45%. And I said we had a 35% chance of winning before. So in the end, I'm giving us an 80% chance to win. The predictive models have given us about a 60% chance to win. I'm a little nervous that I've seen so many people. We'll see what the game day and everybody predicts tomorrow, but I've seen a lot of the experts talking about Georgia peaking at the right time. Joel Klatt said that. Josh Pate, said sort of what I just was saying, that he just thinks Georgia playing at home under the lights is going to be too much, and they just keep finding ways to win, and they probably find the ways to win. Like I said, when I go through the stats and all the things I just gave you, and I look at what the game flow has been for Texas these last 5 games in an SEC play, I see a team that's 7-2 and is legitimately 7-2. They're not a hard luck 7-2. They've earned 7-2 with what they've done on the field, and they could easily be 7-3 by the time tomorrow night's over. So I really think, again, I think Georgia continues to build on the momentum. I just don't see us. We have the things that we have done well, like I talked about: stop the run, prevent long plays, consistently grind and move hold the ball, burn the clock, get first downs, put up yards and points. Nothing big, nothing flashy, but just keep moving and grinding. And then the other part of that is we haven't made mistakes. We just don't. We don't turn the ball over a lot. And Gunnar has been really good about that. He had the strip sack against Tennessee, and he had the or was that Alabama? Well, either way, he did have a strip sack earlier in the year, and he's thrown 2 interceptions. One of them was in the last game, in the Florida game, not the last game, and that was really not his fault. Again, the ball was a little behind Noah Thomas, but he put the ball on him. Thomas, bounced off his hands and got into a position where the guy made a great play for Florida and intercepted it, and that's just one of those freak plays. So, I think Gunner's made like one interception. Now, he would tell you, and we've all seen it, he's probably had about 10 balls on the course of the season that were bad enough that they could have been intercepted, and they hit defenders and went off of them. So, it's all balanced out. In the end, Gunner's probably right. Maybe living a little high on the hog in that way. Maybe he's a little lucky. Maybe he could have had 5 or 6 interceptions against him by now instead of just 2. He had the one that shouldn't have been his, but then he could have had a couple that were on him that he hasn't had. So, but I think generally speaking, we've done a good job of protecting the ball and not making mistakes that have cost us. And I don't see that happening in this game either. And in fact, I think if we continue to build on getting a little more confidence, and I think the best thing that we saw, whether it was a weaker state team that really didn't have the talent to keep up with us or not, whether it was a little bit of fool's gold, I think this team finally getting the confidence and experiencing what it felt like for previous Georgia teams to go out there and just be Georgia and just own a game, okay, they scored first because they had the ball first, and then we rip off 38 unanswered. That felt a lot like Georgia, and it just feels like coming home under the lights with SEC Nation in town and the primetime game and all the hype that kind of fell short because of what happened in the Alabama game. I think it lands this time, and I think when we look at all the things I've described, Texas really isn't the team that we thought they were to start the season, and I don't think they're the team to stop this momentum. We're not that amazing juggernaut, but we've got all the things I just described and at home and the momentum. So I think that's what happens, and I'm actually feeling. I came to the conclusion. I was thinking, I thought I wrote it down, but now I don't see it. I'm really feeling like, I think in the end, this game is like, I think it's going to be like 34 or 38-21. I think that, like I said, I think they'll get a trick play, busted play kind of, busted coverage kind of play, that something that Sark drew up. I think that they'll probably have one good drive a half. They'll manage to get touchdowns out of those. So they'll be very efficient, but I think we'll otherwise shut them down. So I think they get to 17 to 21 points. But again, we hold them to about 330 yards, and we control the flow of the game, and we grind out 400, 450 yards. And how many points we put up between 28 and 38 is really just a matter of how efficient we are. Do we settle for field goals? Do we have some drives stall out where we end up punting, where we got to midfield and could have done better? Do we turn the ball over on downs because we go for it from the 33-yard line instead of kicking a long field goal? Those will be the factors that change whether or not it's 31, 34, or 38, or even all the way down to 27, 28. But so I think we win. I think it's going to be a good day for Georgia. I think we're going to look good on the national stage. I think you're going to hear people talking about Georgia punching its ticket to the playoffs, and we're going to set up a big matchup to end the season with Georgia Tech. And so I think it's going to be a great night. I really think the crowd is going to turn out. I think they're juiced and ready for this. I think we're all just excited. The catharsis of having lost the big game against Alabama under the lights at night. We had a great crowd against Ole Miss, and the crowd was amazing, and the noise was deafening, and that was a daylight game. And so this time, I think we get the full effect of the cool weather. And look, each of the last couple seasons, it's been Tennessee. It was Ole Miss a couple of years ago, came in as a top 10 team with a lot of hype. Maybe they can win. They got beat 52-17. Tennessee came in last year. They had a lot of hype. They were going to make the playoff. They did make the playoff, but they got beat, pretty, in the end, it was only 31-17, I think, or whatever it was. It didn't look like the kind of blowout that you might have thought, but again, we spotted them 10 points right off the bat, didn't play well in the beginning, and then rattled off, multiple consecutive drives, just owned the middle of that game until it was later. So I think that these have been the games that have happened in these night games late at home in Sanford Stadium, and I think Sanford Stadium is underrated because of how difficult and damning it can be for teams to play there. And I think we're going to see that tomorrow night. I think you guys are going to help make that possible. And I think the team's going to love it and thrive and enjoy it. And I think we're all going to enjoy it. So that's my prediction. I think this is, I feel pretty confident about it. It took a while because, like I said, Texas is a real enigma. And I was a little nervous with everybody trending towards us. When everybody wants to trend towards us, I'm like, but I really had to think about whether our momentum, again, was just on the heels of playing weaker teams. But when I look at all that stuff I broke down, what they've done, who they've done it against, what we've done, I don't see there's just nothing inherently great about their team. And so the only way that it's going to be different is if they're totally surprising. If they come out after the off week and they're just running and gunning and playing lights out defense, well, then we'll all be mystified and we'll be like, wow, what a coaching job that they sat down with the extra week and became a juggernaut overnight. Because despite being number 10 and 7-2, number 10 and in a playoff position, again, you look at these scores, 16-13 against Kentucky, outgained by 200 yards, sneaking through overtime against Mississippi State, beating Vandy by 3. None of these are the stats that make you think, okay, this is a dominant team. And giving up almost 400 yards a game in SEC play to just decent to pretty good SEC teams. These are not the elite. This is not Tennessee. This is not Alabama. This is not Ole Miss. They haven't played any of those teams, the real high power offensive teams in the SEC. So, so I don't think the defense is really there. I think it's a little bit of a myth. And I think Georgia's going to expose that. So I hope I'm right. Of course, I always want to be right, especially if I'm predicting Georgia wins. But listen, it's going to be a great Saturday. It's going to be a great Saturday in Athens. I hope you have a lot of fun. You get a whole Saturday of build-up to get ready for it, get hyped up, whatever you do. Please join us. You feel free to share this. Again, you can access this podcast. You can get the video version of it on YouTube. You can get the audio version on YouTube if you only want the audio. Audio is available on Spotify and Apple podcasts, and you can go directly to Substack. You can go directly to thedailydawg.com if you didn't come there from that, and you can see the podcast there. If you come there, you can come to the comments section. There's buttons on the bottom of this post that say leave a message or send a message, make a comment, share. or join the chat. I will be running a chat that you can join in. You're supposed to be a member of the Substack thing. It's free to join. Just put in your email address, jump in and be a part of the chat. There's a handful of Dawg fans that come in there. We'd love to all chat together and talk about the game as it goes. I'd love to have you be a part of that. Please share with other Dawg fans. So I really want this to be a conversation where more of us can get together and just talk and enjoy our favorite team and enjoy talking about it together. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and I hope you really enjoy the game. Let's have a great Saturday afternoon and beat Texas. Horns down. Go Dogs.